David, thank you for doing this. Thank you for talking to Bloomberg.
Not at all.
It's a pleasure to have you there. Shall we begin with the big subject of the UNGA at the moment, Palestine? You've always, you came out earlier and talked about recognizing Palestine, and that is a spur for change, not a substitute, to achieving peace in the Middle East. But I suppose my question for you, is a Palestinian state really possible? You've got Gaza as in rubbles, and meanwhile you've got the whole of the West Bank being carved up as we speak. Is a Palestinian state really still a possibility?
Whenever I'm asked that question, I always think the best place to start is the consequences if it's not possible. I think that there are some people who believe that the best outcome is to have no state for the Palestinian people, and to have a sort of permanent situation where there is no possibility of statehood for them. And I would say, particularly representing the United Kingdom and thinking back 108 years to the Balfour Declaration, and being very committed to a Jewish state, and that sort of self-affirmation for the Jewish people, that part of the reasoning at the time was also that there would be statehood for Palestine. And so you have to give the young people of Gaza and the West Bank hope. There are also some people who believe that there should be just one state. Well, maybe. If there's just one state, then you have also got to explain how everyone is equal in that state. So the only solution is two states. I think that, of course, there's a lot of focus, understandably, on Gaza, but we should remember on the West Bank that there is huge expansion, huge settler violence. This E1 development runs a coach and horses between north-south. West Bank shoves Bedouins from their land.
Do you see that as a deliberate attempt to stop a Palestinian state?
Well, it first reared its head in sort of 2014-15, and William Hague, who was Foreign Secretary at the time, stood against it. And in a sense, the UK government, alongside our European and other Western allies, continued to say that this is not acceptable. So it's for that reason that I think we arrived in a place where, alongside 147 other countries, the time has come to recognize a Palestinian state. I think all of us recognize that this is not going to happen tomorrow, but it is to say that hope is important and that Palestinian statehood is a just cause.
Obviously an area of some disagreement with the administration, but I'm just going to ask you about Donald Trump's speech yesterday. It strikes me, he has not... You had him across to Windsor. You invited him to Windsor, you wined him, you dined him, the King was there, and then he's come out describing London Mayor Sadiq Khan as terrible, that we're running Sharia law in London, that the energy policies are suicidal. Is that what you normally expect from a guest when they come to stay?
Well, to be fair, I think we had a really...
I'm being very fair.
I think we had a really successful state visit. The truth is, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and I and the team put a lot of effort into our relationship with the new administration. We were in Trump Tower back in September of 2024, before Donald Trump won the next election, and Keir Starmer had sent me to the US a few months earlier to try and form a judgment as to who might win the US election. And I took the view that the Republicans were indeed on course to win, and that turned out to be right. Look, just to step back a bit, the special relationship is hugely important between the United States and the UK and our Five Eyes allies. We have the biggest intelligence capability in the world, and it keeps a lot of us safe. Our military partnership is key as well. And then what you saw come out of the state visit is a tech partnership 250 billion pounds worth of investment. And particularly, I think, in AI. Yesterday, I was in New York, first quantum computer OQS. Hugely important that we are partnering with our fantastic universities, our fantastic innovation, our fantastic enterprise, owning that future, given some of the capability exists in other parts of the world where they would have a different approach, I suspect. So for all of those reasons, the UK and the United States, the special relationship, I think, is in very, very good health. Now, look, of course, there are going to be areas where we disagree. Harold Wilson disagreed with Nixon, I think, on the Vietnam War. But actually, when you step back, and I looked at the speech yesterday, America First was very prominent, of course, but it's not America only. I think also attitudes to migration, of course, were very dominant. But the truth is, in every Western democracy across the Western world, there are two issues that will govern both the elections we've had since 2008 and will govern future elections. They are cost of living and migration. And whether you are a progressive party like my own or a more conservative party, as is the case here in the United States, you have to have answers to those two questions, or I'm afraid your electorate aren't going to vote for you.
Do you think those are questions at the moment the right is answering better? And the other one many people would throw in there as well as climate change. You know, yesterday Trump called it, I think, a complete fraud or something like that. Is that these all seem to be areas where parties on the right, you look at reform in Britain, people are picking up, they're getting traction in a way that more centrist parties like your own are finding it harder.
Again, let's step back. So this is a story that has been playing since 2008. It's still current, and my sense is it's still got some time to run, because working people in Western democracies feel deeply unsettled. And it means that electorates are very volatile. They are swinging violently back and forth. That theme has continued. To your question, do the right sort of dominate that? I don't think so. Let me tell you why. Let's go back to Australia. They had a voice referendum on Indigenous rights, did not go well. The Labour in Australia started to sink back. They're about 10 points behind in the polls. They went on to win. Let's go to Norway. Recently again, they got into the doldrums. I think they were at 1.29% behind in the polls. They just went on to win. Canada, again, progressives, everyone wrote them off, finished. Trudeau, forget it. Again, the Canadians went on to win. So no, I think that you can, in the pragmatic centre ground of progressive politics, if you are seen to be sort of delivering on behalf of your electorate, get to a point during the election where people settle and give you another term. But as I say, what you'll find in the interim, when you ask the electorate how they're going to vote, you'll find a lot of people saying, I don't know. And that don't know continues until they settle. Progressives can win in that environment. We obviously did it very well in the last election in the UK. Politics feels tricky in the UK, but where it will be in 3 or 4 years' time could be very different.
Just on that last one on that, it's just incredible looking at it from the outside that Reform, a party with 4 people, this is Nigel Farage's party, is the one which seems to be setting quite a lot of the political weather in terms of talking about immigration and things like that.
Yeah, that's, I think, primarily about the collapse of the old Conservative Party. And commentators here in the United States will have views on what has happened to the Republican Party.
But it's different, isn't it? Because in the Republican Party, you've had an insurgency that has taken over the Republican Party. In Britain, you have a different party.
I don't think it's so different, John. I think there will be colleagues here from parts of the world where they have proportional representation, coalition governments, many parties reflected in forming a government. And then there are countries like ours, the United States, where you've had two parties that are dominant. And there are, the Labour Party is a broad coalition. And therefore, there are manifestations of how those parties, whether you've got dominant parties, express themselves at different times. And there's definitely tensions and pressures. We certainly see that on the right of the political spectrum, and it exists on the left of the political spectrum. You might recall that the British Labour Party had an experiment a few years ago led by Jeremy Corbyn that didn't quite work.
What about when you look at the world as a whole? Again, just before you've newly become Deputy Prime Minister, before that you were Foreign Secretary. You look at the world as a whole, what do you see? A lot of people are worried by the state of the world, including Donald Trump, who basically said it's chaos out there.
Well, I see tremendous pressures that begin with the global crash of 2008, the challenges posed by globalization, the real pressure on politics in Western democracies, driven by working people who are not happy at cost of living crisis, particularly. I also see, sadly, a kind of renewed imperialism in the world where big countries think they can take over small countries. In Europe, of course, that is focused on Putin and his Russian imperialism and the war in Ukraine and all the pressures that brings on the global community in terms of prices particularly, and pressures as a consequence of that. But actually, even in the Americas, you've got Venezuela saying that they quite like half of Guyana. Yes. Surprise, surprise, Guyana's just discovered oil. So that's the dangers when big countries think that they can take over small countries. And then, of course, you've also got this technological revolution going on that is a little bit like the massive advances that were being made at the turn of the last century that led to a very turbulent 30, 35, 40 years of the 20th century. We're in a similar time, and that's where the partnership between the UK and the US, the investment that we saw as a consequence of the state visit, the tech partnership particularly, the race for clean energy, and I realise that that is contested by some, but the UK has made a commitment to clean energy and we stand by that commitment to clean energy, and I hope most of the audience agree with us on that. All of those things lead to tensions, and my judgment is, I've now been in public life for 25 years. I always say I started out in politics looking more like Denzel Washington, and I've ended up looking more like Forrest Whitaker. But anyway, I've been around a while, and my prediction is that those themes will remain dominant over the next decade or so.
It's quite an interesting thing. You've gone back a couple of times. 2008, the financial crisis. You see that as more important than, say, 2016, which will be the year you have Brexit and you have the first Trump presidency. Do you see those? Do you see Trump and Brexit stemming from what happened in 2008?
Yes. I guess I do see that the strife of working people comes out of that period. You see a lot of global economies go into serious amounts of debt after that period. And of course, I haven't mentioned the pandemic, which also doubles down on that debt in economies and puts a lot of public services under particular strain. I wrote a book a few years ago now called Tribalism. It was really about the new tribalism that we're seeing emerging in politics, and I think that those themes are still with us. But I've always been, as you know, John, I've always been, despite being very happy to be a progressive politician, I've always been a politician who wants to work across the aisle, finds bipartisan opportunities. And I took a little bit of stick this summer for taking my friend...
Going fishing with J.D. Vance.
Vice President Vance fishing without a fishing license,
without
getting
a permit,
into some trouble. but actually you can forge common ground despite standing up for your values and being clear where you stand in the ground, and I've always sought to do that.
Do you think that if you talk to anyone in America at the moment, they would say that moderate middle of politics has gone? You know, there used to be a time where you would regularly see Republicans and Democrats sharing cabs from places and things, and do you think that is still marginally better in London and Westminster and the European capital?
No, I'm very sadly that I lament the fact that middle ground, the centre ground, the ability, and it's so important for stability in the world that countries like the United States, like the UK, can work cross-party. And why do I think this is important? Well, look, I've been Foreign Secretary, or indeed Shadow Foreign Secretary. I've been in foreign policy for 4 years, and now as Deputy PM, backed with a domestic portfolio, but obviously picking up the international as well. And what I see is that there are parts of the world in the middle ground, let's take the Gulf, where Gulf countries and economies are able to set a strategic path. It's 10, 15, 20 years. The same individuals are in politics. They can set a course. I see more autocratic countries, obviously China, Russia, Iran, North Korea being able to do something very similar. And I worry that Western democracies, unable to find common ground, feel a little bit more like they are bouncing around in terms of strategic vision. And it's only by seeking to find that common territory that you're able to do that. Now, globally, this is why the partnership that the UK and the US have, particularly on intelligence, military, tech and innovation, gives us a strategic view. But I do insist on trying to find the common ground and trying to disagree agreeably, and always remembering that, yes, democratic politics is contested and you can disagree, but please let us preserve the cornerstones of democracy up against autocrats and dictators, where people do not enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy coming together in a room like this.
David Lammy, Deputy Prime Minister of Great Britain, thank you very much. I look forward to reading about you sharing a cab with Nigel Farage.